So what I'm going to be talking about today is cyber hygiene in the age of COVID-19. And when you guys think about it, who here has not been affected by the coronavirus? COVID-19 has taken every headline by storm, and over the past 8 months, it's just conversation. It's almost become a way of life, being careful so we don't get infected with COVID-19. Just the recent stats I checked on this morning, there's 34 million cases reported globally. There's over 1 million deaths, sadly, as a result of COVID-19. Who would have thought it could have grown into something so bad? And we don't really know exactly what the future is. Even today's headlines, what do we appreciate that the President Trump and the First Lady have tested positive for COVID? And it's certainly a concern for all of us when we think about the importance of good hygiene, of staying safe and staying healthy amid this terrible pandemic. But COVID-19 also presents and poses risks of something else. Cyber attacks, increased cyber attacks, and that's exactly what started to happen when this really started to develop end of February, beginning of March earlier this year. And if you think about hackers, they look for any opportunity at all so they could take advantage to exploit vulnerabilities, to take advantage of weaknesses that people may have, distractions, and certainly COVID has been a huge distraction for many of us and impacted our lives so much. So who moves in? Cyber criminals. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit today. And if we think about hackers, they're really targeting what? Our dependency on digital tools. I want you to think about that for a moment. Go back a number of years ago, 10 years ago, how different it was. Yeah, we probably use computers and the internet and even a phone. Now our dependency on mobile technology especially, we think about the smartphone. Everyone's got a smartphone on this planet. We're all dependent upon it. And our dependency to constantly be on that smartphone, and again, it's not just for talking, but also texting and email and social media, and we're working from our smartphones, especially with this pandemic in place, with remote office work being done globally by many people so they could stay safe. So our dependency on digital tools such as our smartphone and, of course, the internet, video conferencing like we're doing here where we can't be in person, that's opened up a new channel for hackers so they could move in and target. Now, let's just talk for a moment about some common sense benefits of good hygiene. We know all of these things, but just in brief, what are some benefits of having just good hygiene from a health perspective? We know it prevents disease. We're more accepted in society, and no one wants to be around somebody that's a messy person, a smelly person. When we maintain our hygiene and have good hygiene, what happens? Our confidence is boosted, our self-esteem is improved, and good hygiene even prevents problems, pains, and poor health, and so on and so forth. So that's what the benefits and the good results are of good hygiene. And the same is true with good cyber hygiene. And think about how widespread this coronavirus is. It's affecting all of our lives personally, but also global health, the economy, the political and social systems. What a strange year just for the elections alone, right? If we've watched any of that, how different things are and how different they will be. Just the fact that the global pandemic, it's affected over 200 countries around the world. Now, in the digital space, the unseen threat, though, is the risk of cyber attacks. It's probably grown tenfold, contrasting that to where we were last year. So if we've got 10 times more cyber attacks and cyber criminals exploiting vulnerabilities, what do we need to do? We need to improve our cyber hygiene. That is paramount. So I want to try to highlight 3 areas why we need to take cybersecurity action and take measures right now. We started out mentioning about how dependent we are on digital technology, our smartphones, the internet, computers, all of that, more than ever. And that is probably one of the most effective means of communication, the internet. That's brought people together. but it's also welcomed, unfortunately, opened the door for cyber criminals, as we know. Thinking about this pandemic, what has it created? It's created video conferencing. Look just for a moment at Zoom, a company that maybe a lot of people did not know that skyrocketed in growth. They themselves had to deal with a lot of cybersecurity challenges and updates and patches just to keep the users on the video conferencing platform safe. But that's the way we live now. That's the way we communicate with our relatives via Zoom. Maybe hold religious meetings. Maybe hold meetings for business remotely through video conferencing apps such as this. So it's very important that we understand that cyber criminals are continually targeting that. And again, the more we have reliance on it, the more potential we have for being victims. And cyber criminals, we know they thrive in the digital world. What do? They follow us on social media. They build a profile about us, and then they want to use that against us, whatever they're trying to accomplish, be it get our credit card, get our banking account information, our social security, perform identity theft. There's so many different areas. So we want to be very cautious and use best practices and common sense when we're in the world, on the internet, in social media, in video conferencing and things like that. Now, what kind of got me where I am, and I shared this last year when I was able to present the keynote at this conference. My company is a security company. We're 48 years in business. We develop wireless security tools, and we sell it mainly to DoD agencies. The irony of the whole thing, the more I've educated people about best practices in the world of cybersecurity, the more I got a target on my back. So my company was targeted. Credit card, debit card, Twitter account, received repeated DDoS attacks, email scams. And then finally, we had $65,000 stolen out of our credit card or out of our checking account in the company after our credit card and debit card were all compromised. It was a big financial mess. It kind of freezes your company for a while. What did it end up doing? It ended up being a federal investigation. And that's what happens when something exceeds $50,000 in a financial crime. And it was a big mess. Paperwork, emails, phone calls. Finally, we got all the money back. But in the process of all of that, when we were hacked and hacked again, I learned a lot about the importance of placing best practices, not just myself, but everyone throughout the company. And I'll talk about a few more of those things today. But it's important for you as a viewer and listener to realize you can take control of your cybersecurity at your home, at your remote home or office, at your job site, by taking basic precautions. Many times we get complacent and we push it aside. It's important that we don't do that, especially now amidst this COVID pandemic, because cyber criminals have upped their game, as I've mentioned there. Now, when the dust settles and things happen, when we're not implementing best practices, strong passwords, two-factor authentication, when we're not careful on social media and we share too much information, when we have loose policies within our company, not shredding documents and all of these things, cyber criminals move in. They compromise personal information, our data, and then what do they do with it? They put it out there for bid, for sale on the dark web. So I wanted to just take a few minutes to talk about the dark web, just so that you can get a sense of it. And again, if you have any questions afterward, through the chat, you could throw them up, and we'll spend the last 10 minutes or so. Be happy to answer any questions there. If there anything I covered too quick, or you just want to know additional information. So first of all, what is the dark web? We hear about that often as we read headlines and stuff. It sounds like a scary place, and it can be. But it's not necessarily. Really, the dark web is the internet's underbelly, if you have to think about it. And it represents approximately 5% of the entire internet as we know it. Now, the information on the dark web is not indexed by search engines, so it's hard to find other sites. Like normally we want to find a site, we're using the surface web. We might go on to, whatever our favorite search, maybe it's Google, and we type in a particular thing, Bucks College or this or that, or you want to find some information about a course. We could do that easily there, and it's indexed and it finds the information very quickly for you. But that's not the case with the dark web. So you have to know the specific address to type in to get to it. Now, to get there, to access the dark web, you use what's called the Tor. It's an anonymous browser. And what do we mean by that? Something that's anonymous means you can't easily be tracked or followed. And why? It's because they simply bounce around. Think of it this way, your IP address, where your location is that you're actually using your computer. And your data on top of that is all encrypted. So now if you think about it from a perspective of cybersecurity, and more so from a cyber criminal, that's the ideal place to conduct your criminal empire. Why? Because you're anonymous. The data is encrypted. They don't know your location. So do you see how easy it is for cyber criminals to steal your data, which we know has been happening for years, but now also have a market where they could buy and sell stolen credentials, credit card information, checking account information. That's really scary. Now, I like to contrast that to something we can all relate to, traditional robber. We always think about a robber. What does a robber do? In the past, we see it on TV all the time. They pull up in their car, maybe they slip masks on, and they have a gun, and they go into a bank, and they say, give me all your cash. They put a gun up to the teller, and they quickly pull out the cash, and they take off. Well, think about some of those things that they go through that could give them away. Maybe it's the license plate on the car. Maybe it's a video camera outside the bank or inside the bank. Maybe it's the teller spots something, a tattoo, or their height, their hair color, their build. They see the type of gun that's used. They hear their voice. So these are all different tells what? So the criminal could be caught. You don't hear of that many bank robbers or going in and robbing a bank as they used to do traditionally. Why? Because a lot of the cyber criminals have migrated over to cybercrime because it's more lucrative and there's not all these things that will give them away. It's a lot harder to catch somebody. Think about the things that are bought and sold on the dark web. How do you pay for those things? Well, oftentimes it's cryptocurrency, right? Bitcoin, we've heard about that, which is digital currency. Bitcoin allows one to remain, in a sense, anonymous, right? Not 100%, but more or less anonymous. Whereas if you go and rob a bank and you get a bag of loot, what happens? Oftentimes those bills can be traced because they're serialized. Bitcoin, it's much, much harder to actually catch the criminals that are buying and selling using this digital currency. So again, another layer of keeping them safe, right? So you can be anonymous on the dark web using Bitcoin, which is anonymous digital currency. The IP traffic and everything is routed around so they don't know your exact location. It's encrypted. You see all these advantages of using the dark web as your criminal empire. So it's important just to realize the basics of how this works to understand why cybercrime is so successful and it's so difficult to catch people. Now, interesting, a number of years ago I attended, it was an FBI briefing, and they reviewed the top 10 reasons that cyber criminals were caught. And on that list of the top 10 cyber criminals caught, all of them, in one way or another, had information that was divulged on social media. And I thought that was interesting. In other words, they're bragging about it. If they compromise a hotel chain or a particular restaurant, and guess what happens? Once they get this large database and they start selling it, they want to have bragging rights. So what does it tell us? A little bit about getting into the mind of a cyber criminal. They have very big egos. Sometimes they're good business people, sometimes they're not, but really they're sloppy when it comes to social media. Again and again and again, they're bragging about how much money they stole. And why is that? Often to the point of what I just talked about, because they're so focused on staying anonymous on the dark web, using Bitcoin, using the Tor network, they're able to kind of shield themselves, or so they think, from getting caught until they make that fatal mistake and brag to their buddies about how much money they got, how many credit cards they stole, whatever the case may be, and guess what? Then they get caught. Now, another point, a second point I wanted to briefly touch on was how cybercrime exploits fear and uncertainty. So think about that now, especially during this pandemic. I was out at the RSA show. This was end of February to beginning of March, right when everything broke out with this pandemic. And I was reading the news headlines while I was there, and we're washing our hands and trying to stay clean and reading all these things, and we're starting to get nervous. And there was a pretty big outbreak there in San Francisco at the time. So I was trying to decide, do I stay? Should I go? But again, what did that play into in my mind right away? Here I am traveling away from home on the other coast at a security show filled with 100,000 plus individuals. Many are starting to wear masks, not shaking hands. It promotes what? Sometimes uncertainty and fear. I got nervous. I remember getting on a bus and I'm saying, should I sit in the back of this bus? Let me sit toward the front with the window open so I don't possibly get this unknown. At the time there in February, March, we were just reading about all this stuff, the coronavirus. We didn't have a lot of information. It was still new to me and new to many of you as well. So again, cyber criminals realize that, and they're going to play on that, our fear, our uncertainty, and they're going to try to exploit human weakness again and again and again. Any type of crisis situation, they're going to move in. And what happens when you're a little nervous, when you show a little fear? You tend to make mistakes, and that's natural. These are mistakes we might not normally make, but we tend to make mistakes a little bit more when we're nervous, when we have fear. Online mistakes. And what are we talking about? Especially ransomware. Ransomware has exploded in the last few years. Why? Because people still are innocent and make mistakes. I receive multiple emails with malicious links embedded in them that most of them have a strain of ransomware that could be then dispensed or launched on a weekly basis. It's scary. So you could put up a junk filter and virus scanning software and all kinds of things. At the end of the day, there's a percentage of emails that will get through with these links in it. The question is, will you be tempted to click on it? And most people say, no, no, no. Yet every single day, millions of people are clicking on links which then download malicious software that may reside on their computer or their network that eventually will come out and encrypt the files, and then all of a sudden a ransom will be put out. And the cyber criminals will say, hey, it's not like the old days. It used to be $300 to $600 US dollars, the equivalency of X number of bitcoins. Now that's changed greatly. Why? Because cyber criminals have said, ooh, it's a lot more lucrative if I go after a hospital system, if I go after a particular county, because there it could affect millions of dollars and hundreds, if not thousands of lives. So they've upped their ante and targeted these different groups, organizations, government agencies with more advanced ransomware attacks. That's concerning, especially amid, again, a pandemic like we're at. Imagine the hospital system that's already overloaded in certain areas, trying to handle normal emergencies and medical situations. On top of that, you've got this COVID mess with many people sick coming in, quarantine, and all this other stuff going on. Now they attack the system that is really dependent to keep people alive. You could see how that could play in and how they're exploiting human weakness, fear, and uncertainty. So more than ever, hospitals and counties need to make sure throughout their organization that they are educating all employees. The importance of a strong password. It can't be said too many times, although I feel like I've been talking about it for years because I have been, yet still, I constantly hear throughout my day people that have used weak passwords, they're not strong enough. So what are some things that you can do? Well, if you're creating a password, and try your best to make it long. Long is probably the most important factor to keeping it from being hacked. So when I say long, I now encourage people 15 characters minimum. Uppercase, lowercase, numbers, symbols mixed in there. It shouldn't be anything that's in a common dictionary. In other words, it shouldn't be a word in the dictionary. It shouldn't be a place. It shouldn't be Mississippi, or it shouldn't be Scott Schober, common names that we use. Anything associated to us is easy to remember, right? But it's easy to hack. And that's the problem. So a good, strong password, in my opinion, should be something that's really hard to remember. Now, there are some clever tricks you can use. You can use a phrase, and people have tried the quick brown fox ran down the road, and alternate uppercase, lowercase with this long passphrase, and then put some numbers in there and some symbols. And that works for some people if they're disciplined and they're good. For me, I'm now over 200 passwords with all the different accounts and things I access through my business and personal life. It's too much. So what can you do? And I encourage you to do this. Consider a good password manager. And using a good password manager goes a long way. It takes a little bit of discipline once you get started, but allows you to get very organized and have a unique password for each and every account. And then you have to just remember your long and strong master password to get into your password manager. That's important. And I always encourage people to write that down, take that on a physical piece of paper, and lock that in a safe that's locked in a secure place, or a safety deposit box in a bank or wherever. So it's somewhere that's not connected intimately to you, but you have access to it if you for some reason just can't remember it. And that way it's really hard to hack in and get access to all your passwords, just using good password management. Another common sense practice, I've talked about this, I've preached this to people, and people say, yeah, that's good. Two-factor authentication. Everybody is offering it now, and it really does add a level of security. Many people dwell on the fact and they'll say, oh, well, that's been compromised, there's workarounds, or they could intercept the text, and everything has been compromised. Nothing is 100% secure. But isn't it better to implement something that will make it 95% more secure than doing nothing at all and being complacent? And that's why I encourage people, if you're using Gmail, if you're using Yahoo Mail, or whatever the case may be, ask yourself this question: how much are you paying for that? Probably nothing. When you pay nothing for something, you're really trading that for something. In other words, you're trading out security for that. In other words, they have access to that information, to what you're typing, the content of your email. And again, if you're not using multi-factor, two-factor authentication, oftentimes that can be targeted and compromised by cyber criminals, who will then move into your account, change your login credentials, and take over your account and take that information, whatever you're corresponding. So it's not just at your end, it's also who you're corresponding to. So really use caution there. When you're using free email services, don't share anything that's confidential. You might want to get it encrypted or get a focused email that's going to be more secure. And again, these are just very simple best practices. Why do I always encourage it? Because people say, oh, that's common sense. Guess what? Because people don't often use common sense for cybersecurity in their lives. They talk about it, but they don't take action on it. And that's why it's so important. In the vast majority of cyber attacks, I want to just briefly talk about deploy some type of social engineering. We think about social engineering. It's when you're duped or fooled out of information. So somebody may call you on the phone and they may say, hi, Mr. Schober, how you doing today? And well, they know my last name already. They're friendly. And maybe they say something else that makes me convinced that they know me. Whatever it is, it could be a lie, it could be a scam. And once they start to break down the barriers, what happens at my end? I might become more vocal and share more information. They might say, hey, I'm from the fraud patrol at Bank XYZ. We think there's some suspicious activity on your account. I just need to verify some information to make sure you're who you are, so we know that it's going to be safe. Your account number ends with ba, 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 ba. Is that correct, Mr. Schober? You were born on this date, Mr. Schober. Yeah. So they got a few things that they were able to garnish about me, and it could be from gathering things on the internet, buying information about me that's been compromised on the dark web, all used as a guise so they could divulge a little bit more information about me. It may sound very convincing, and I've had many of these phone scams as well as internet where they share a little bit of information in hopes to get some information back. So again, when those type of things happen, stop. I always drill back and ask them some specific questions. Excuse me, let me just get your name again. What's your email address in case we get disconnected? And let me get your phone number. And guess what? 9 out of 10 times the cyber criminal will hang up. So you have to be a little bit proactive and be very careful not to divulge any information. If they give you a link and want to remotely access your computer, maybe you're working at home and you're having some problems, make sure that it's somebody in your company that you do know and you trust, if it's IT that's helping you, for example, as opposed to a third party. We probably have all gotten a call. I know I have had a few times at my company and personally. Hi, I'm a Microsoft support technician. I'm here to help you out. If you could just enter this specific address into your browser, we can help and get this virus off your computer quickly so it doesn't end up being ransomware or something else. So they kind of scare you into saying, well, okay, they're here to help me. And then you find out, well, they're not from Microsoft. They're a scam. They're trying to take over your computer and have everything encrypted with ransomware or something. So again, caution, stop. It's good to think out some of these things and pause before you provide any information at all, because that will be their point where they'll move in. Another thing that's especially tied into the coronavirus that's kind of surfaced, and a lot of people aren't aware of this. If you're like me, when this first broke out, especially in March and April, I was following the virus very closely in my state here in New Jersey and surrounding states, of course, out of concern for my staff here at the company and my family personally and my friends. But what do? A lot of times we would go to websites and we would go over these maps, and they would have lots of information on the maps. We'd click here to see how many cases are reported, how many people are infected, how many people are in hospital, so on and so forth. A lot of those sites that have popped up were really either fictitious information or actual information stole from other sites, but put there to fool people to go online and in hopes to get them to click, and that way the cybercriminals could download malware to our computer. So again, use caution. Try not to surf the internet and try all these different sites to gather statistics and follow this pandemic, because likely one of those sites are going to be a site where they will download malware. So again, use extreme caution. Use trusted sites that you've heard of the name, and go up into the browser and look, especially if you click on something that redirects you to another site. That's the danger. It's better to enter it directly into your browser to make sure that it is secure. Usually see a lock. HTTPS for security is up there. There's all kinds of tricks that hackers are using to get around these measures to fool us, to make it look credible, especially now with so many development tools for developing your own website. Anybody in their house can develop a convincing website, and they can go on another site and steal scripts, steal graphics to create their own website that looks very real. So again, use caution there, especially during this pandemic. We're focused on the fear, the uncertainty, and that's why cyber criminals are kind of distracting us. They're tricking us into trying to get us to click on other fraudulent sites there. We also have to realize, we think about COVID-19 and we address all these different health concerns here during this pandemic. Our social habits and our routines are also greatly affected, and it can fool us sometimes there. We have to look at our online behavior, the way we were doing things versus the way we're doing things now. And obviously it's changed and it's modified, but we have to now implement new measures to stay safe online. And again, maybe just to contrast that again, going back to our kind of theme there about keeping good hygiene amidst this COVID epidemic, and contrasting that with some things on cyber, in the cyber world, and good cyber hygiene. We know about the importance of washing hands, right? That's extremely important because physical contact can spread COVID. So we want to use alcohol-based cleaning solutions. We want to clean our keyboards, we clean our phones, our game controllers, our remote controllers, everything, right? So we want to take time to review that we're doing those type of things, but we also want to take time to make sure we're reviewing our digital hygiene, our habits. When we do things at home, we get home from work and we go on the computer, the internet, there's probably certain sites that you visit and some additional sites amidst this COVID. So we have to carefully analyze, where am I going? What am I clicking on? To make sure, again, we're not getting duped or pulled in to be fooled. If you're working from a remote office, as again, many of us have from time to time amidst this COVID thing, and we may be doing it in the future. We talked about passwords. Have you looked at your home router password for your home Wi-Fi system and your firewall? Is that secure? Is it a long, strong password? Have you shut off your SSID so you're not broadcasting that to your whole neighborhood? Hey, here's a Wi-Fi network that you can try to camp on or can try to hack. Because there's a lot of tools on the dark web now that anybody can obtain that can be used to hack into Wi-Fi systems. And oftentimes the term war driving, where these cyber criminals will drive around, they'll look for a particular neighborhood. They're looking for open Wi-Fi networks. People are getting better at securing them, but I've done a test. Everywhere I travel, I try to scan with some of the tools that I have to see if there's any open Wi-Fi networks. I always find a minimum of one open Wi-Fi network everywhere I go. And that's scary. So people are getting it, but they're not there yet. And be extremely careful, since we're talking about Wi-Fi, not to be quick to camp on the free Wi-Fi hotspots. Maybe it's a hotel chain or your favorite place to pick up a coffee or whatever. And oftentimes what cyber criminals will do is they'll set up an opportunity to use a familiar name and brand that you're used to. You're used to going to get your favorite coffee at XYZ company and sit down and relax a little bit, do some homework or do whatever you're doing there, read an article. You're distracted on whatever's going on in your coffee, and it looks like it's XYZ is a free open Wi-Fi hotspot, and we're quick to click on that. Why? We don't want to burn our cellular data, depending upon our package, right? So what should we do instead? We could have either a mobile hotspot ourselves, right? That's important. You can host a hotspot if you're with a friend, so you could share that if somebody has a lot of data or unlimited data. So there's certain things that you could do. It's very hard to hack a 4G LTE signal when you're pulling in the data that way and hosting a Wi-Fi hotspot with a strong password again. Cyber criminals are not going to break into that unless they're extremely sophisticated. Is it easy to perform a man-in-the-middle attack at your local Starbucks Wi-Fi network? Absolutely. And cyber criminals do this all the time at hotel chains and other things like that. So be cautious not to jump onto that free channel there, or else you'll have nothing but problems. VPNs are good. Virtual private network are good to consider too. I recommend that. However, caution goes out. There are a lot of free VPNs out there. You can go on the internet, download a free VPN, start using it, and a virtual private network is in a sense similar. To simplify it, think of, we talked earlier about the dark web and the Tor browser and how IP traffic will bounce around. Well, virtual private networks should do that too. It'll bounce traffic around so you could stay anonymous. It'll encrypt it, and all that's wonderful. The only challenge is a lot of the free VPN services out there do what? They actually track what you're doing on the web. Ask yourself again, why is it free? You're trading something. Your privacy, your viewing habits, what you type in on Google is what they're selling to an advertiser. So therefore, again, caution needs to be placed before we're quick to put out that type of information and use a VPN. So pay for a VPN. I pay for a VPN service. It's worth spending a little bit of money. They're not that expensive, but it will provide a lot more security. So keep that in mind. Also, software. Another point I want to bring up there. We want to be extra vigilant on verifying what kind of software we're downloading, what type of apps we're downloading these days. Too many of us are quick to download anything. It's a hot game, TikTok or FaceTime or whatever the case may be. Ask yourself those questions. Where does that data reside? What server does that data sit on? Is that data backed up in redundancy and sitting on the other side of the world, a full backup of it? Sure, absolutely. Do you have any control over that? No. Or is it in the cloud, which is what? Some unknown server. We have to realize that. And even though that data will be encrypted oftentimes, end-to-end encryption, most of the companies will tell you, these app manufacturers, software providers will say, oh, it's end-to-end encrypted. You're completely safe, Mr. Schober. That may be true. There are cases, though, where it goes to another country, and guess what? If that country's government says, I demand the encryption keys to decrypt this data because I need access to it for national security reasons, guess what? that company, be it Apple, Microsoft, Google, whatever, TikTok, it doesn't matter who it is, will have to hand over that information so it can be decrypted. There are cases where tech companies have designed it now so they're going to stay out of it and say, sorry, that's 100% private. I can't even give you it. That's the case. That's a good thing, I think. And that's kind of where Apple is heading and some other tech companies. They've learned they have to draw a line and stay out of the battle because the government will constantly come after them, and they're using it for surveillance. And it's done through every country around the globe to different degrees. But again, be careful what we're using and what we're putting out there, because our privacy is not that private as we may think or may believe. I always like to share this statistic. If you just take your smartphone, average smartphone user, take out your smartphone, zip through, look at all the apps that are on your smartphone. And if you were downloading the terms and conditions on your smartphone and you had to read all of those, how long do you think it would take to read all of those terms and conditions? The average smartphone user would take over 3 months of you just sitting there reading those things. So the question is, do you read all the terms and conditions that you agree to when you download those apps? Absolutely not. And neither do I, because we don't have enough time in our lives to do it. We spend more time reading the terms and conditions to what we're agreeing to than we do sitting at traffic lights throughout our life. So we have to put things in perspective. Don't be too quick to download every single app, the latest and the greatest, because it looks cool. If you did download it, I also encourage, do some housekeeping. After the conference today, there's probably a few tips and things that you learned. Take a few minutes, turn your smartphone on and ask yourself, when did I last use this particular app? If you haven't used that app in over a month or 3 months or longer, guess what? Get rid of it, especially if it's a free app. Why? Because it's collecting information about you, your likes, where you are. You're giving away permission in many of the apps, the terms and conditions I have read, to give them access to your camera, to your microphone, to your contacts, to what you've last viewed on your searches on your smartphone through the browser. And every app's a little bit different, but we're giving that away. We're opting into a society where we have no privacy. So keep that in mind, because that opens the door up to a lot of cyber crime. It's important. We're following all this information about the spread of COVID and how many cases, so on and so forth. I want you to contrast that with updating your computer, updating your smartphone, updating your software patches. A lot of us get annoyed. It could be automatic updates, but more than that, you have to manually click it. Take the time to read through what's actually being introduced in this particular update. And why do I say that? Not too long ago, it's about 3 months ago, there was an update. I use Apple, iOS. A Catalina update came out for my iMac. I didn't have time to actually test it out and read it ahead of time, the reviews and what are the new features, the goods and the bads. So I quickly said, yeah, update it. And I tried to do that through the night. I came back the next day and guess what? Nothing's working. My label writer didn't work, my printer didn't work, my scanner didn't work. I couldn't open Microsoft Word, I couldn't open Excel, I couldn't open a PDF. I said, what is going on here? I was in panic, and probably some of you have been there before. Well, some of the new patches that were introduced in Catalina had some bugs, going from a 32-bit to a 64-bit, and all the things weren't worked out. I'm still struggling through that 3 months later. So what am I trying to say? I'm even guilty of this. Take the time to read what's in some of these patches and security updates to make sure you only implement what you need so you can learn the conflicts there may or may not be with different drivers, with security, with encryption, because they have to spell that out before we simply just press the button. We need to take more time to be security conscious. That's really essential there. Otherwise, you're going to have problems as I have. Just wanted to briefly touch on cybersecurity, and probably many of you are learning about cybersecurity because you're attending this, you're a student, you're in the profession of it, and there's a crisscross there. I highly encourage it. Why? Because there's a huge cyber talent shortage in the industry everywhere, across the industry, across all different disciplines on a global scale. There is a huge need for cyber talent. So especially those minds that are willing to learn and try and experiment with things, I encourage you, please do that. There's estimates that more than 500,000 workers are needed immediately for cybersecurity roles to be filled around this country alone. That's a devastating number that can never be fulfilled unless people are willing to go to colleges and get certification and be willing to try things hands-on. So I encourage you, please try to do some of those things and learn about cybersecurity. Find your little niche that you appreciate so that you can grow in it and then you can have a career in it and do really well. I just wanted to wrap up again, just hit a couple tips here, and then I'd like to take at least 5 minutes or more, just in case there's any questions anybody has. So just as a couple reminders here, especially with this COVID crisis and the teleworking policies, make sure that you know what your organization, your school, what are the policies for remote working, and make sure that you're actually following those policies carefully. In your organization, they may say that you can use your own device, bring your own device to work. They may issue devices. Make sure you understand those policies there. And be careful when sharing information in screens, as I talked about earlier, with others, and making sure that they're actually your co-workers. Very, very important. Common sense physical things. Guard your device, right? A lot of times when you leave our house, we lock our home. Do you lock your device? And what do I mean by that? Your computer, your laptop, your smartphone, your iPad, whatever device you're using, do you have a passcode in there before it turns on? Not as convenient, but it's a lot more secure. So please take your time to do that. Make sure you're locking your devices there. A big problem recently I've been hearing more and more about, people are sharing passwords. And this is nothing new. Somebody scribbles it down, hands it to somebody. But a lot of people think that if you text somebody a password or email a password, it's okay or safe. Remember, there's a level of digital permanence to everything we put out there over the internet. Same thing when you text somebody something. That information is residing on a server somewhere, somehow. It doesn't just poof and disappear, and it may last for some time. So really think before you're quick to share a password. You're much better off actually these days speaking over a telephone that's a secure wireless transmission of an actual password than you are in emailing it to somebody or texting it to somebody. We mentioned two-factor authentication and the importance of encryption earlier, and we talked a lot about updating your devices, so continue to do that when you can. And just maybe in a final thought here, don't be afraid to ask for help. And what do I mean by that? If you're in a situation and you're not sure if something, can I click on this or not? Is it safe to send this email? Is it safe to update this particular security patch? You can ask somebody in IT. You could ask somebody with a little bit more cybersecurity expertise first to bounce it off them and help you think out the problem. I've helped a lot of friends that way and kind of stepped them through some of the basics before they're too quick to download or click and update something that could potentially become catastrophic. So again, using best practices and common sense. That's what we're trying to share with you today. So by practicing good cyber hygiene, we can minimize the risk of getting coronavirus, and the same is true if we practice good cyber hygiene. We can combat the threats that cyber criminals continue to throw at us. So I really appreciate your time and attention, and if there's a few minutes left there, I'd like you to feel free to throw a chat up, and I'd be happy to try to answer it or share at least something from this end if you'd like. Anybody that does throw out anything, I'm going to, again, through Owen, I'll have a book sent out to you there as a little thank you there. And I'll send you Cybersecurity is Everybody's Business, my second book. And third one that's coming out soon is Senior Cyber, really geared toward seniors and dealing with the internet and cyber crime. So